All right, so for my second paper for the class, I wrote over the series on Netflix called Space Force. There's the logo right there. And no, that's not what I wanted. So basically, this is a TV show. It has 2 seasons, only 17 episodes between the 2 seasons. Season 1 is heavier. It's got 10 episodes, and the second one only has 7. So there was some speculation of, okay, we'll get a 3rd season. It'll be more robust because the 2nd season does end on a cliffhanger, which is rather frustrating. But that's obviously how you get more views, right? You end on a cliffhanger and you keep people guessing. Netflix is the creator of the show. It's on their streaming platform. They chose not to renew it for a 3rd season, despite a lot of public interest in that, mostly due to budget cuts. So that kind of sucks. We don't get to find out what happens with the whole asteroid coming toward Earth thing. But we can speculate, of course. So again, Space Force came out in 2020 with the 1st season. The COVID pandemic, with all of us being home and locked down and, attached to our streaming devices, that probably helped its success initially. And then the 2nd season came out in early 2022. This thing, when it comes to reviews, like, the public seems to like it, but the actual reviewers of the world, they don't like it. They gotten very low scores on Rotten Tomatoes, and when I was looking for published reviews, like Variety and the Hollywood Reporter and a lot of other magazines, they tore it to shreds. They don't like it. They think it's stupid, and they don't think it's cohesive and put together well, and doesn't have much of a plot and things like that. But honestly, I think they're trying too much to compare it to The Office, which is Steve Carell's other workplace comedy show. And a twist of logic, I can't watch The Office. It's not interesting to me, but I can watch Space Force. So yes, there is slightly different comedy at play here, but it is a science fiction comedy. It's not, extraterrestrial alien kind of sci-fi, but it is sci-fi. Because it is basing a whole lot of guesses on what could happen. Because fundamentally, this show was based on the idea that we were getting a 6th branch of the military called the Space Force, which we now have. It's now official. It's still obviously in its very early days. But when this idea was first broached by the president at the time, everybody was like, that's a joke. He's only calling it that because he likes the way it sounds. We don't need a Space Force, because a lot of what the Space Force does in real life is they actually just adopted basically what a lot of the Air Force did. So I'm not going to get into the whole debate of are they worth it or anything like that, but basically they made a show off of this spoof. And the show, especially the 1st season, is very heavily politically satirical, fired at the former administration, because of how much of it, frankly, a joke some parts of it were. So that was a lot of the writers and the producers and stuff poking fun at that current admin. And you can tell there's a change in the administration between seasons, because now we're in President Biden's administration. And yes, we still have Space Force, but he's not saying the word Space Force every other sentence. And he, isn't sitting there saying it's the best thing ever because he invented it or whatever. You had a very different demeanor than President Trump. Let's just say that, and you can tell that in the show. So the show has a couple of big names in it, especially like Steve Carell, Lisa Kudrow. Those are the 2 I knew of just from previous comedies that I've watched. Like I said, I tried to watch The Office, couldn't really, but I have obviously seen a lot of other Steve Carell's work. Lisa Kudrow, obviously, I know from Friends growing up. There's some other names in the show. So Dr. Adrian Mallory is played by John Malkovich. I didn't know who that was. To some people, he's a big name. When you look him up on Wikipedia, because I had to look him up, he's apparently a big deal. Sorry, friend, I didn't know who you were. But he's one of the head scientists of the show, and that leads to a whole other series of questions, like why is he the one person in charge of everything science related in this entire government branch? That's a little bit much. Yes, he has 3 PhDs, supposedly, we find out later, but at the same time, he cannot physically be in charge of anything that's related to science, because he's in charge of the analog lunar mission. He's in charge of the real Mars mission. He's in charge of microbiology and lab rats and like all these different things. It's like, it's not possible. Another big name that I sort of recognized was Jimmy O Yang. I've seen some of his comedy specials before. That's the only reason I knew who that was. He's the other scientist who's worthwhile in the show. He's like the second in command. We do see some more scientists come to play as a part of the show in the second season, but honestly, they are like one note. They have maybe one or two lines. We don't remember their names. What about it? They don't need to be there. I think they're just there to kind of spread the dialogue a bit. So fundamentally, the show is about poking fun at the creation of the Space Force and all the nonsense that goes along with creating a new branch of the military, because not many of us have been around to see something like that, if anyone, because most of our military branches are pretty old. So there's a lot of bureaucratic nonsense that goes on. And then, of course, we have General Nayard, who's running it, and he is also struggling to be a single father for the first time and dealing with a precocious, if you want to use that word, teenage daughter who thinks she knows everything, like all teenage girls do. And then we've got some other direct ties to the Trump administration, like one of the PR manager, his name is F. Tony Scaramucci. That is basically, they're all but saying it's Anthony Scaramucci. Like, those names are too similar. Tony is short for Anthony, like, come on now. And he was also Scaramucci he was a character. Let's just call it that. I don't want to get into that. So let's see, talked a little bit about the plot. This show is also playing off a lot of what's happening in real life. It talks about the issues we have with Russia and with China being super military powers, and also powers in space, which is a serious issue, that because they're not all signatories to the lunar agreement and things like that. So those are issues that aren't going to be science fiction for very much longer. We got to figure out what's going to happen. In this particular show, the Chinese and the Americans sabotage each other on the moon, which the US is a signatory to the lunar agreement, so why would they even do that? That's a whole other issue. It doesn't have a whole lot of music. It doesn't have a laugh track in the show, so it's not like the Big Bang Theory where there's a laugh track or anything like that. So that is off-putting to some people in their comedy, but it also gives the show a more serious tone, like a more serious sci-fi tone, because it's not just relying on gut punches to get the point across. Like I said, there's plenty of reviews out there, like 39% on Rotten Tomatoes. That's not great. That's why I personally don't look at Rotten Tomatoes if I'm going to go see a movie, because most reviewers on there hate everything. I go make my own decision. And I'll admit, when I first watched this show a couple years ago, I wasn't 100% sold on it. It took me a few episodes, and I was like, oh wait, I can't stop now. I like it. Okay. And so now it's kind of one of my comfort shows, and I just watch it to have it on the background. There are some liberties taken with science. In all science fiction, they will do this. You can only nitpick so much. But there are some liberties taken. And like I mentioned, Dr. Mallory's workload. I'm not going to go through every single episode and find all the inaccuracies or all the different subtle jabs. Like they have an episode where they are basically interviewing a civilian CEO to get rocket fuel, and her name is Edison James. That is very obviously Elon Musk in female form. Forgot to put that in my paper, but there you go. So there's just a lot of subtle jabs, and it's not a super serious sci-fi like a lot of them can be. It's not all doom and destruction. It's more lighthearted and satirical. But other than that, it's a pretty good show. Again, only 17 episodes. You can binge it in like a day and a half max, and you're good. So if that's appealing, check it out. If not, it's okay to pass on. Obviously, we're not getting a third season. So that's my ideas about Space Force.